Hi, this is Dr. Shannon Wong Lerner, and I'm a communication coach consultant and also a cultural and digital storyteller. And you're here with the intersection, diverse folks converse. My special guest for this episode, which is just the third episode, is Gentry McShane. Oh, so
Hey.
actually, why don't you introduce yourself? That's what we usually
Okay.
do.
I'm Gentry McShane, also known as Cat Power Man 5000. I live in Oakland, California. I'm a service industry person who also is a filmmaker and a meme dealer on the internet.
And then this episode is actually in preparation for election 2020, which is just around the corner. And we've called it Politics of Filth, Memes, Britney Divine, and Election 2020. And so I actually really wanted Gentry to come on the show just because I'd been looking at his memes for a long time. And I've taught visual rhetoric, and I've taught like different ways to look at advertisements and how to even do your own advertisements, maybe even before memes were a thing. So this was, I guess, about 12 years ago with a program that I was in for my graduate work. And one thing that I noticed as like memes started to develop, and you have to like tell me if this is even right, but this is just what I noticed, is that the most striking memes, like the memes that would really like hit you in the gut and like really have an impact, were these like very conservative memes. And that's what I had noticed, like looking at Reddit, and I guess mostly Reddit, because that's the culture I knew from the very beginning. And I wondered what else was out there, what was out there for a more progressive perspective on politics and visual media in a way that would connect to people that are looking at it, that want something that is critical and humorous and not gross and not white supremacist. And so I was really, very struck when I saw Gentry's work, because it made me really think about things that were actually happening. And sometimes I would see things like I didn't want to see, but I just felt like I should see.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I really wanted him on the show for this critical cultural aspect that I want to bring onto the intersection. And just to think about, how we use media, and perhaps like how we consume media, how we maybe just consume it without even thinking about it because it serves a need for us, but we don't necessarily go outside of that need. And so perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and how you started. So this part is kind of the intersection part where you're talking to me and the listeners as if they don't know really anything about what you do, and you could just explain it to us in those simple terms, and then I can talk a little bit more about what I do and how it connects.
Okay, great. Yeah. I call myself a meme dealer because I'm not completely making all of these
Yeah.
memes. I collect them from the internet and then curate them
Mm-hmm.
essentially. So I have a format that I use. I like to start. It's 10 slides on Instagram. So Instagram allows you to post up to 10 photos per post. So I use all that space usually. And sometimes I'll put my own work in there. I do make my own memes, or I make memes that are original content. But yeah, so I do kind of have a format that I go by. I like to start it with a piece of art that I find on the internet, usually some kind of original art or some kind of photograph, something that's not really a meme that kind of has meme potential,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. Uh, and then it always ends with a celebrity. So it could be a still from a film, it could be a singer, it could be like the singer at home chilling, it could be them performing live, it could be anything. So people always ask why, and I don't really know why. It's just a creative decision that's stuck. But I do find that what happens is when you have these familiar images like celebrities in the post, and then you are exposing people to these very leftist ideas like socialism or like, Black Lives Matters or police brutality, transgendered identity, all these different things that are kind of new for a lot of people.
Yes.
And you have Julia Roberts mixed in with it. It kind of draws people in this very strange way, where you start to see this kind of intersection essentially grow between different classes and different races and different genders and things like that. So that's kind of what it's become. When I first started it, it was right after Donald Trump got elected, and I just wanted to find it like a safe space on the internet to kind of post things that I thought were maybe more controversial, just to kind of, give my family and past employers a break from my rants and raves on the internet.
So did it become an outlet for you in a different way than perhaps what were you doing before you did memes, and how did this sort of transform into this other thing?
I've always been very media focused in my work and in my passions. I'm a filmmaker essentially and a performer. So I've always worked on films and videos, whether they be short internet kind of concept videos or longer format short films. I did a feature film anthology about the gay hanky code, which is an old coding system that was used with handkerchiefs to kind of give other gay people it was a thing used in cruising to like show what fetish you were into.
Yes.
And so each film was a different color of the hanky code, and each film was directed by a different director from around the world. So I'd always been interested in these projects that kind of brought together large communities of people, which is like the radio theater project that I just did, like the entire cast. It was like a social distance project essentially, and the entire cast were people from all over the country, all over the world.
I knew that they weren't, but when I listened to it, they sounded together.
That's amazing. That's
so
great.
I was like
feedback.
listening. I was really listening to it, and I was like, Gentry did a really good job, blending or whatever you call it with audio, where there were parts where they sounded separate, but overall,
it was hard because I was recording it.
Space.
Yeah, I was recording a lot of it on Zoom like this. So some of it, it depended on the microphone people had and things like that. But it was cool to just kind of bring together all of these different people from different aspects of my life and my work to collaborate on this project. And so I did the same thing with Hanky Code. And so I feel like my meme page is a little bit in that tradition now of, bringing together the internet community that I've formed for myself and bringing all these different ideas together and putting them in the same place where people can find them in a centralized manner. I mean, the reason the Hanky Code was such an important project for me is because the gay hanky code is something that's very much associated with gay male culture. But what my intention in doing that project was to kind of reinvent the idea of gay cruising in this very like more queer trans kind of construct, and just making it about everybody and making it something that we can unify over as queer people, rather than it just being this like kind of white gay male legacy. So that's what I do with my meme page now. It's you can see it on Instagram, and I try to post at least once a day, and it's definitely blown up over the last year, which I think came out of a lot of people being home and my own probably depression, or dealing with my own feelings around being isolated and having the internet as the only way to communicate these days. So it's definitely helped, because I get a lot of feedback from people saying, oh my God, this is so great. It boosts my serotonin. This made me laugh. Really need the laughs these days. Keep them coming. Things like that. So I definitely feel like they have an impact.
Yeah, I really love that. And I feel like, I don't know how quickly it grew, but the fact that it's at 30,000 followers now, says something about how it's striking people, especially right now that we're all home, and all the stimulation we had from outside is just like contained inside. And so like having that outlet seems really important. I think, one thing that we talked about a little bit in our pre-podcast chat, and it's something that you just brought up, is in terms of how your memes, and you could touch on perhaps some of your other projects too, but how your memes work to bring together community. And that's something that you had said before, this idea of like internet community, the idea of like more leftist ideas and how they could, coalesce to bring people together. And something that I had talked about before as well, and something that struck me about your work, is that it's not inside an echo chamber. So and part of it is the like satire and the humor aspect of it, and just how much wit there are in memes, I think, and like the psychological depths of memes. That's what I think when I look at them, is like some people will fight online when they're reading your memes, and you don't necessarily see that as a negative thing, which I am very compelled by, because most times I've been part of some sort of, political effort, social effort that did involve art, I guess, because art, I feel like, brings out different things in people. Everyone wanted to kind of be on the same page, and then it was hard to have different ideas or different opinions. And so to me, memes are fraught with tension, but in a really good way, to where it makes people have to deal with something that's in themselves, something that maybe they think that they didn't want to deal with. Or, we were looking at this Lenny Bruce thing, and he had talked about, it was a very weird show where I guess Hugh Hefner had a show where they would be inside the Playboy Mansion. And it's very different from the movies that we see now, where like Hugh Hefner is really old and everyone's walking around in, bikinis.
Smoking jackets.
Yeah. Well, he still has he still kind of I think he was wearing a tuxedo, but it was like everyone had these very big poofy skirts on, and all the, well, I guess they weren't bunnies back then. So he was trying to cultivate this high class culture to bring together, something that he saw in Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was a comic intellectual. I see him as an intellectual, a lawyer, who was around in the 50s and 60s, and was brought up on charges for obscenity, like over and over and over and over again. And he just kept going out and doing it. And he had people on his side that you would think of as like very wholesome people, like Steve Allen. So he did things on Stephen Allen's show, and that they got in trouble for that.
Oh, wow.
Too. Yeah. And Steve Allen sort of loved him, which I thought was really interesting. But I think the Hugh Hefner connection to him is interesting too, just because of, him asking Lenny about something that maybe could help him. I don't know. But also, trying to create this sort of like salon on that show. So he had all types of different celebrities and other intellectuals, and they were all there. And I had no idea that this show, it was very weird though, because it's like this high class cocktail party, almost like you'd said All About Eve. You had listened to a radio show, a radio play version of All About Eve. And there are those scenes where Betty Davis, having these very fancy cocktail parties, and it was sort of like that. But then there's Lenny Bruce, and he's like blowing his nose and just, trying really hard not to say the wrong thing, but he's just kind of saying whatever he wants to say.
Yeah, the thing about Lenny Bruce that's really interesting is when I've seen his stand-up and read his work, it's definite. I would definitely classify it as comedy. However, it's not necessarily the type of comedy most people are familiar with, in the sense that it doesn't really make me like laugh out loud. I think it might make some people laugh out loud out of, like you were saying earlier, discomfort.
Or repression, because I listened to some routines, and you could hear these guys like, ha, 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 like these really strange laughs that were like pretty hearty laughs. It was almost like an uncontrollable laugh. And I would think that it was something like he says an obscene word, and then they just start laughing. It's not even necessarily, he's not even That's not even the punchline of the joke yet. He's just
Right.
saying some words and they're laughing.
Right. And I think what you're saying about memes being tongue-in-cheek or kind of creating a little bit of polarization amongst people, that's true for some of them. But then I think that there are memes that are kind of universal. You know, if you're making a meme about an ex, or you're making a meme about, you know, some kind of being sick or something that everybody deals with on a daily basis, then you're pulling people in using that meme and then kind of just sucker punching them with this other thing where they're like, whoa, I didn't even think about that.
Or you didn't see it coming, right?
They didn't see it coming, yeah, or something like that. And then there's different kinds of memes that bring people in. So it's like we see the same memes over and over again.
Sure.
A lot of times, you know, the boyfriend looking behind him at the other girl, and then the girlfriend's mad. We've seen that one a million times, but it's like what they're putting in the meme, the captions that make it what it is. And so when you put something that's kind of a new thought or something that's more of a, I don't know, marginalized thought in there,
yes,
the algorithm shows it to people more because they're familiar with that format, but they're maybe not necessarily familiar with that idea.
Oh, I didn't know that it did that.
So that was the reason, like when the Breonna Taylor thing, when they were trying to get the justice for Breonna Taylor trending and arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor trending, there were a lot of memes that had that in there, and it would be memes that people were familiar with, like that one. And but there was a backlash to that, obviously, because people were like, that's not really a joke, it's not funny. And that's true, it's not funny at all, but it was showing up in the algorithm.
Using it as I never thought of that as using the memes as a device. I mean, I knew like the hashtags, and Gentry had said right before we started the podcast that right now hashtags are not working because there's this concern for, you know, false information. And
on Instagram, at least.
On Instagram.
I don't know about Twitter, yeah. But yeah, so I don't know if that's, I mean, you know, that's my own inclination about the algorithm too, but I do think that that's how it kind of works. And I don't think that that's necessarily the reason that people make memes or the reason that they choose the format that they choose. But I do think that that's kind of like tapping a little bit into the code of how the algorithm works and how things go viral.
And I don't know anything really about that. I don't really.
Right. I mean, I'm learning. I'm still in the process of learning, essentially, about, you know, analytics and insights and all of that. But
I'm testing all the time, and I do learn as I go. But I didn't know the thing about the memes at all.
Right. So I think that was part of that controversy, is like, you know, how do we make this accessible to larger communities? How do we make it relatable to larger communities, but also respect
what has happened,
and respect that it's something that is a very serious problem and needs to be addressed, while addressing it, or, you know, educating people about it. So, you know, and I don't have the answers to that. I'm learning. I posted those, and people gave me their feedback, so they didn't like it. I listened. So, you know, I mean, it is what it is, and you learn as you go. I think it's constantly changing, the landscape of social media and all of that.
This is interesting too, because I think of like that cancel culture, and I'm thinking a little bit about, you know, when do we, because I called someone out recently on LinkedIn because they had, and I think I told you about this, they had posted this very favorable, I feel like sort of, well, this is this huge blind spot involved with the Bill Burr routine on Saturday Night Live. And they had just sort of strangely, I thought very strangely, touted him as this spokesperson for Black Lives Matter, which I just thought was really
Oh.
weird, especially because I know someone at Comedy Central who's worked with him, and they just thought that was the weirdest thing. And nothing he's this terrible person necessarily, but he just would not get that he was not thinking that deeply when he said
This was somebody made a meme with him in it.
it wasn't a meme. It was just
oh.
they had put their own commentary. And this is what got me in the whole Lenny Bruce kick, and looking that back up. And then I found this thing with Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone. I'm going to read that quote in a little bit because I think it's really good, thinking about me,
I love him,
thinking about like your role in the media, and then other people's roles as they look at your memes and they consume them. And so
well, it's such it's user created content. I mean, memes are the people. It's not.
Talk more about that.
It's not always. Well, it's not always. It's not like some table of writers. I mean, in some cases, I'm sure it is, but for the most part, memes are made by individuals that are usually working people. And they're supposed to be relatable. It's kind of just an idea. It's impulsive. You make it and you put it right out there. A lot of times you're not necessarily getting like feedback on whether or not it's funny before you even put it out. So you're kind of testing a lot of times when I make a meme, at least I'll post it on my Facebook just to kind of see what kind of feedback I get first before putting it on my meme page. So I think that there's this aspect too where the left people think the left isn't funny, or that there's no sense of humor when you're a leftist, or there's no sense of humor when you're passionate about social justice. Like, how could you think anything's funny? And they're just going to come for every joke, And that's just simply not true. We all know that there's lots of things that are funny that are not racist and that are not sexist or homophobic, ableist.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the kind of the cool thing about meme culture, is that it is this working class people's access to media that is not always funny either. It's not always a joke. Like, there's memes that just simply educate you about a fact you didn't know. And sometimes you have to check that fact to make sure.
And there's like self-care memes that you have in there. I noticed that recently.
Psychology is a huge relatable topic that you'll find in memes all the time. People that are recently single love to post. Well, who's that like proverb person? It's like rupee. I'm trying to remember. They do like a lot of like kind of spiritual new agey quotes, or people always quote this person in that way. Anyways.
Oh, you're talking about Rumi?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's a meme,
Yes.
And then there's the parody versions of it too, which are hilarious. So, but I mean, that's a meme in itself, and that's not always funny. It's not always there to be funny. It's there for people to relate to and feel something about it, and draw people in. So I mean, there's lots of different topics that could be covered in it. I did see this one meme that was actually a graph about memes, and it had rich people, poor people, and then like the types of art. And so it's art that's made by poor people for rich people is theater. Art that's made by rich people for poor people is film. Art that's made by rich people for rich people is opera.
Okay, that's what I do.
And then art that's made by poor people for poor people is memes.
Okay.
And I kind of liked that way of looking at it, as far as, it's this, there's vast possibilities, and there's so much to learn.
Yeah. No, I love that. And did you come up with that, or was that someone else?
That was someone else, but I posted that meme before, and I've talked about it a few times with people just because
There are a lot of poor opera singers. I will tell you that from the people I know, because it's very hard to actually make a little bit of money. So, but I hear what you're saying.
It's funny. I was recently talking to my grandma. She loves the opera. She's an opera singer, and she used to be an opera chorus person or background, do opera background. Yes. And I was like, "Ooh, I wonder if I could do that, even if I wasn't like and she said, "Yeah, they have people that don't even sing. There's just opera extras." And you get to wear the outfits and everything. So I don't know.
Do it. I haven't heard really of opera extras. They're usually kids, but
okay.
Maybe you had to do that about 30 something years ago or 20 something years ago too.
I mean, I guess it depends on which opera they're doing,
Yeah, there's something there was that quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there was that really interesting quote from the Hugh Hefner, Lenny Bruce conversation that I thought was interesting, where Hugh Hefner was asking him that perhaps the reason why he was censored is because it was society that had the problems, not him. Like he was this sort of messenger of these problems, and people are just like, we don't want to hear that, and they want to suppress it, right? And so Hugh Hefner had offered this idea that it's society that has the problems, not you. And when you touch upon that, it becomes a problem. And then Lenny Bruce had said, he sort of thought about it and he said, I'd love to think that I'm a martyr, but I'm not. Like, I'm not trying to help society with their problems. He said, I'm society. And it was like I feel like it was very, like, a very important moment in the interview where like everyone stopped. They're all like,
I think it's kind of a famous moment. I definitely feel like I've
heard
of this. I feel like I've heard of this before I read it. Yeah.
And there's a pause, and then he starts talking about integration, right, versus segregation, and saying, people that are for integration, they're really the immoral people, and they might as well be atheists, like not care about anything or anyone. And then he starts turning to people, which I thought was really great. He's like, your society, and he starts like pointing people out. And I thought it was like a really interesting moment. It made me think about your work a little too, because we had talked a little bit about how you see your work and curating the memes or dealing the memes as a way to bring community together. And like, I come from a Jewish background where when you have a Torah study, it's not like a Bible study where you're like, everyone's kind of agreeing, and it's like, this is what I've experienced because half of my family is Christian and half is Jewish. And when I went to Bible study when I was little, it was like you had to sit in your chair and you had to like learn the stuff, and there was really no room to argue or to you were just learning these things. And then when I went to Torah study when I was doing my master's, it was kind of weird because we're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so it was this very sparsely populated place. So there were Russian Orthodox Jews, and then there was like this very radical feminist liberal Jewish lady, and then there was just a scattering of other people, and we were like fighting it out, like what these things meant and what they could mean and what they meant for today, right? So like, we're not fighting like facts, we're not biblical archaeologists where we're talking about things that are found and what fact is in the scientific way. It's like, what do these words mean? What could they mean? And how could it be helpful for us today? So the text was like a living text, which I think is interesting. Right. But the interesting thing is I felt so much more comfortable in that space, like fighting it out and being critical and like caring about each other, because it's like we cared about each other, not just being lazy in our thoughts, right? And that was something, and I'm an agnostic person, so I was always bringing that up too, which was not a hit with some of the people, but
I'm sure, yeah.
It makes me think of memes too. Is like, how do we create community? And something that I think is very important right now with Patrice M. Palmer, who's a director of inclusion right now in Colorado State. They had talked about how DEI could stand to improve diversity, equity, inclusion, that type of work. And I think also like just social justice work could improve by not focusing so hard on civility and morality, and have feeling like you have to be so perfect and careful and like say the thing you're supposed to say, but instead grapple, like when a problem happens, let's talk about it, let's grapple with it, let's like dig in. And to me, that is very similar to what we did in the Torah study, where we're all fighting. And it's very similar to what you're doing in creating this community of people that care deeply about these issues, so much so that when they see something that triggers something into them and hits them, and they say no, and then they have to write something, they write this long thing to you, or I don't know, they're active now. They're active. It doesn't matter really the result in a way, and it doesn't matter. Of course it matters, like they're upset, but it matters that they're acting, they're not being passive, and they have the agency now to act. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little more about that.
Yeah,
and with your work too, because this is like politics of filth. Like, what does that even mean? Thinking about your play and John Waters, and I would love to dig into that.
It's interesting because it's true. It's very important to let people know that they're heard when they're upset about something they see. It's important to know that, for them to know that you're receiving the information. I think that that's key. But I do think that you're never going to satisfy everyone all the time. I think that when we talk about things like safe spaces, I do think that there's no way a space could be safe for everybody. I think there's always going to be some kind of hurdle. I think what really defines a safe space is a space where you're free to create that dialogue that might be uncomfortable. It's a space that's safe to be uncomfortable, essentially.
And to me, that's like a healing. That's a potential for a healing.
Right, because we want to have these dialogues and we want to talk about these things, and it's obvious that it's on people's mind if they're going to be passionate about whether or not it's, morally right for them to see it in a comedic context. I feel like it's the thing with the meme page for me is I just recently put my name up there, but for a long time I didn't even have my name. A lot of people didn't even know it was me. So I'd have my coworkers be like, "Are you Cat Power Man 5000?" "Oh wow, I had no idea." I'm like, "You didn't?" I didn't know. I wasn't trying to be inconspicuous about it. But what ended up happening is that people sometimes think that it's me presenting my opinions, my ideas. And it's not always the case. Sometimes I'll relate with something. Sometimes I'll think something's funny, or sometimes I'll just think something's an important fact or opinion to share with the world that really needs to be out there as part of the echoes or part of the, fabric of what's going on. And, I've posted pictures of Trump supporters with bedazzled Trump hats just because that made me laugh, and it's definitely not that I'm a Trump supporter that I'm posting that. And I think most people understand that context. But I think what ends up happening a lot of times is people think it's like me presenting it as myself for some kind of social capital or social gain. And in reality, I don't really feel like I'm benefiting very much off of having the meme page. It's not like I make money doing it or that I'm getting some kind of big social capital boost in my personal life from it. If anything, people stay away from me more because of it. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
Okay,
I'm just joking. I'm just joking. I was just saying today, like earlier, I was like, I wonder if I haven't dated anyone for a while because of my meme page.
Like,
I think it's a constant joke amongst memers that it's like no one wants to be with a meme lord, but that's just it's just part of the fabric of the jokes that are there about that lifestyle. I mean, it's something comedians do all the time. It's a very self-deprecating kind of thing.
I think it's interesting to think about yourself as this like dealer and curator and to take yourself out personally is really interesting to me. Like people wanting to, when they get triggered, they want to go after someone, and then they see you, and then I'm going to write this thing to this guy. So, and it made me think a little bit back
I mean, it's important for me to be there because for accountability purposes, it is important for there to be a person attached, I do think.
It's not like there was a random, there was a bot that was randomly choosing things. You chose these things for a reason. You chose them in a sequence that made sense to you, and it told a story to you. And maybe people,
Right. And so my main concern is when people complain is like, okay, what's the solution? Like what I like to try to be solution oriented. How can we fix this? How can we not necessarily fix it even? Like someone could be, bothered by something and then they might unfollow me and never want to look at another thing that I post again. That's up to them completely. However, what is the solution here for me going forward to try to do better? And I think that as long as you have that in your mind, you can't really take any of this as hate. And a lot of times I don't take it as hate. If somebody comes at me and they're like a fascist or they're like, being a total Nazi, it's like, obviously that's hate.
Yeah.
But if somebody's coming at me and they're like, I don't think you should post this because A, B, and C, or, it makes me uncomfortable that this is being shown in this context with these other memes or with this other meme. Or what happens a lot is I'll post the celebrity that people don't like or that's been canceled. Like one time I posted Doja Cat as the 10th slide and a bunch of people were like, oh, she's homophobic. Like, okay, so is probably someone else I've posted in the past and you didn't say anything about them,
I do think, can I stop you for a moment?
Yeah.
I do think there's something really interesting. I wonder if you could talk about this, about like perhaps I had this happen once where I wanted to see Wonder Woman with like a family member who's a little girl, and then her dad was like, no, because she's pro
Israel.
She's pro Israel. And I was like, how many other people are pro-Israel? You see directors produce, but the fact that she's out in the public and then it came out about that and then it's trending, he felt
right, or that they found that on her and they found some way to find the hole in the issue of Wonder Woman. It's like, yeah, I definitely, I mean, good on him in a way for knowing that information. Yes. It's cool. It's like, it's something people need to understand and talk about, but it's also the culture around being pro-Israel in Hollywood, the culture around being pro-Israel in mainstream culture, in our politics, everything, the culture around being an American and being pro-American is similar, so there's ways to look at it where it's not, you don't need to necessarily go after people, like individuals, I think is harmful.
But you think it's like a way to take a stand, but I don't know how effective that is, because to me, if you're going to take a stand on this one person that you know about because it's been published for you, right, then are you going to look at everyone else and figure them out, and then are you going to stop doing that? That idea of like picking and choosing, I just think of your work too, and your meme work, and perhaps some of your other cultural work that you can talk about. I'd love to hear more about. Well, it's like
it exists, and it exists, Wonder Woman exists with that actress as Wonder Woman. There was nothing we can do about that now. That's who played Wonder Woman in the last Wonder Woman movie. It's there. You can choose to watch it or not watch it. But at the same time, to understand the pulse of the culture, to even be able to make jokes about it, you got to see it.
Sure.
So I mean, it's all about the lens that you look at things through. And I think that it's important if he wants his daughter to be educated on that issue, maybe, you can go see Wonder Woman, but hey,
then let's talk about it.
Let's talk about that actress that was in Wonder Woman and why I'm not too keen on her.
Yeah, I like that idea of not, it reminds me of, these production codes in which Lenny was like really concerned when he was on that show, and which mostly applied to film from the 30s to the 60s, that were basically like decency, morality codes. And so there were so many things that people couldn't do and couldn't say, and they couldn't look a certain way. And thinking about how that dates back to dime novels, like early like pop culture. I actually have some of them. So like the very first sort of like pop culture in the US that was also censored, and there was like a heavy tax put on them to send them out. So then the idea was that it was degrading the youth's mind. So this idea that if you consume something that has an evil person or an immoral person or someone that's done something bad, or an idea that's you think of as bad or hurtful or harmful or something triggering, then you're consuming that, and now something's in you that's bad, right? This is a
right,
very
and it's
old,
the same. It's the same idea as the violence in the media is what's causing mass shootings or something like that. Where we all know that it's not violence in the media that's causing mass shootings; it's a lack of understanding about the difference between reality and fiction, or it's it's also cyclical. It's like you can't just say that somebody saw something and then did it because they saw it. It took them doing the action to make it happen.
Yes.
So there's something up with their conscience at that point. So it's interesting because it's what do we define as obscene, and why, and why can't it be seen, and why shouldn't it be seen?
And we're adults with minds who like critical,
but critical thinking is not really taught in our culture, and so I can understand why it's a concern.
And it's something that I think also is confusing for people. This idea of, this is making me feel this way, I don't like this, so you just want to cancel it out, right?
And that's totally up to you. Like I don't, I will always give people an option to opt out. Like there's no, if you don't like a celebrity, I'm not going to sit here and like talk your ear off about why you should give them a chance. Or it's the same with what's going on with the election. Like, let's be real. Like, I'm not going to I voted blue. I felt like I needed to, from my own perspective and the stuff that I've gathered from what this election is about. And I have my own reasons for that. But am I going to sit there and tell somebody who's already made their mind up about why they don't like Joe Biden, why they should just love Joe Biden, or why this is about Joe Biden at all? Because it's not.
No.
And so it's weird to try to force your views on other people. It really is, no matter what it is, it's weird. And if you really truly believed it, you wouldn't need to convince people so heavily. It's almost like you're trying to convince yourself in a way sometimes,
Yeah, I think the idea of separating things that you don't want to see that are already there from your consciousness to protect yourself and to sanitize your consciousness, or whatever you want to say, is something that is the opposite of critical thinking, where you might face some hard truths, you might face some perspectives, opinions, images that you don't agree with, but like, now let's figure out what to do, or let's talk it through why it bothers you, and that being a more productive way to deal with something like that. I'm thinking
and
about,
also we're not always equipped to deal with it, so sometimes it is easier to just opt out and say, hey, you know what, not my steez, not what I want to look at, not what I want to hear, peace. And that's cool. Like, catch you another time, maybe, hopefully, and so the play that I worked on is it's a sequel to.
Can you say the name of it?
So it's Flamingos Forever.
Okay.
It's it was the unproduced sequel to Pink Flamingos, a John Waters film, and John Waters had written a script for this
And for
film.
people that don't know, can you talk about John Waters just a little bit, just so we know?
Sure. So John Waters is an underground B filmmaker. He's been around since the 60s. Started making films in high school. He's from Baltimore. Very weird, trashy, campy aesthetic. Very much ingrained in our culture in a way that a lot of people, that he doesn't get credit for, but that a lot of people know. Like, if you see his work, you'll just know it. It's like Hairspray, Crybaby.
Yes.
Those are some of his bigger projects. But
the
so
Hairspray became like a Broadway. Did it become
Hairspray
like a
became a Broadway play,
play.
and so did Crybaby. And,
okay.
He's definitely part of the canon now, for sure. And he's more of a writer now. So he's written all kinds of books about pop culture and things like that. But this screenplay he wrote it in 1987. It was supposed to take place 15 years after the original film, which was in 1972, and it was pretty much just kind of like a retelling of the first film, but in like this modern context, because now it was like the late 80s. He never got the money to produce it. That he was asking for like $500,000, which was like a lot of money in 1987. No one would really give him the money to make it, and he had other projects going, and he ended up doing Hairspray around that time instead. So that is the like synopsis of the origin of the play. But what happened is I had this book called Trash Trio, and so that's where I found the screenplay. It was like three John Waters screenplays, and at the end of it there's like this special screenplay that was never produced, and it's for this film. And so my friend and I adapted it into radio theater because it's the pandemic, and we're like, oh, that sounds fun, and like we could cast people and people could do it from wherever they are, and we don't have to be in the same room as them. And it would just be an interesting, fun experimental project to do. So that's what I took on around, I think it was like July when I took that on, and we premiered it in September. So it took 2 months to finish it. It's almost like, it's an hour and a half, so it's almost like an entire feature-length film, but just without visuals, if you can imagine that. Lots of sound effects, fun soundtrack. But what ended up happening is that we had to change a lot of stuff in the screenplay when we were reading it, because it's not anything against John Waters or thinking that, it's definitely what he wrote was like problematic, but it's problematic in the context of now, for sure. And so there were definitely things that I did not feel comfortable with in his story that we kind of made our own, so when we presented the project, we say that it's inspired by the John Waters screenplay, not to say that it's based on, because we changed quite a bit of things, and we had to adapt it to radio theater. So there's a lot more explaining, there's a lot more like saying which character is talking when they're talking, things like that, so that the audience doesn't get too confused when listening to voices. But the very interesting thing about this plot in particular for Pink Flamingos and for Flamingos Forever is that there's two camps of people in it. So there's Divine, who is the filthiest person alive, and this is what she calls herself. This is the title she's given herself, and she's filthy because she wants to live out in the boonies in a trailer with all her weirdo freak friends and do whatever she wants and live free, essentially. Just live free and be unbothered. Pretty much what we all want. Then there's the people who are kind of combating this, and this is in the original story and in this, so they're the antagonists, and they are calling themselves the filthiest person alive. So they're fighting Divine for this title. But the irony is that these people that are fighting her for the title are actually the filthiest people alive, because they do terrible things. Like in the first one, they kidnap women, impregnate them, and sell their babies to lesbian couples on the black market. In the second one, they kidnap children, get them addicted to heroin.
I was listening to that part.
I mean, it's like there's like these kinds of, you know, I feel like he's bringing up a good point about this idea of what we think is filthy and what we think is obscene. And it goes back to something you were saying earlier, and that's, you know, you are society, like
Sure.
Lenny Bruce said, is that who is the filthiest person?
Mm-hmm.
Who is it Trump? Or is, you know, and it's like, yeah, that's who's filthy, but he's over here pointing his finger, calling everyone else filthy.
Yes.
And it's almost like that's what makes him the filthiest person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, but then it's like, you know, to like use that and twist it and be like, I'm actually the filthiest person because, you know, I'm a pervert and I'm a alcoholic or something, you know, that's just filthy. It's like, that's actually not that filthy. That's actually really common, like a common,
America. And then
relatable.
that makes us think about things that we do that we think is normal, right? Because everyone else is doing it. It's a status quo, but it actually is part of this like filth culture.
Mm-hmm.
Is interesting because when I was listening to that Lenny Bruce interview with Hugh Hefner, I keep going back to it because it was really just so weird. It's imprinted in my brain that he had asked him about being a sick comic, because that's how that was how he was classified, and that's how in the newspaper people would say that, right? Sick comic, sicko comic.
Sick.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was that like dirty, like the filthy politics, filthy culture, right? Filthy person. It was interesting because then he started comparing himself to other comics who he thought were filthier in a way.
Oh.
And it was interesting. He actually said that Abbott Costello probably told like the filthiest joke that he had ever heard. And it was filthy because it was coming from Abbott Costello, who you wouldn't think would tell a filthy joke. I think it was,
or maybe he was personally offended by it. I mean,
so
it's
the
like,
joke, I can tell you the joke. It was, what am I saying? It was Luke Costello. Like,
oh, okay.
It's like, wait, how old was he? Yeah. So Luke Costello, he told this joke about that his wife said that if he were to get remarried, that she would like dig herself back out of the grave and like get him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then he said that he would bury her face first. And I was just like really grotesque.
That's terrible.
Really, really grotesque. And grotesque in a lot of ways, right? This image of this woman just like digging, I don't know, it's just really gross. But I thought it was interesting that it was hard to tell what he was doing with that, because he was bringing it up because I think he was saying there are filthy things that happen in society that people get away with because the image is that they're wholesome people, right? And we think about what Trump is doing, it's really weird. I mean, you just think about all the things that are going to happen after this presidency is hopefully over, and all of the cultural things that are going to come out, the movies and the weird plays, and you know, it's going to be a lot of stuff.
I mean, it's changed culture whether we like it or not forever, I think, especially here in this country. And I think, you know, it's interesting when he said, you know, these are the shithole countries.
Yes.
And then you look at the failing infrastructure, and you look at the economy here, and you look at places like Detroit and, you know, like Chicago, and you look at like the conditions that people live in here in our country, Flint, Michigan, still don't have clean water. That's filthy. That's disgusting. That's not the kind of country I want to live in, or that anyone should have to live in. But here he is pointing his finger and calling all these other countries shitholes. And it's ironic, you know, because who's the real shithole country?
Yes.
Who's the real terrorist? Who's, you know, those kinds of things.
And that goes into sort of moral arguments and, you know, the laziness that we could fall into if we don't critically have a tool to critically look at all of the information we're consuming every single day.
Right. And I think that for me, that's one of the most important reasons to like oust him from the White House is the rhetoric. And
the rhetoric is strong.
Damage. It is strong. I don't think a lot of people realize how strong it is. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but the people that I have a hard time getting through to that are kind of, you know, anti-Biden or don't really want to vote Democrat, which I totally understand. Like, absolutely. I
It's
was
everyone's
Bernie
right to vote for
100%.
whomever they want to vote for.
And I've never thought of the electoral process as being a really good purveyor of things like human rights or anything like that. You know, it's more about policy than anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of the things I really try to get through to people is Twitter is real life now. Like
Yeah.
this is not just, it's not just, oh, that's Twitter, that's him on Twitter. You just want to be happy when you're scrolling on the internet. You don't want to see your president saying racist things. That's not real life. That is real life.
That is
and
real life, because people are
how,
actually acting on it. And you think about that, look at the FBI reports on hate crimes of transgender people, of Asian Pacific Islanders, of queer
Muslim
people.
yes,
Yeah, Muslim
absolutely.
people. It's like up. I know for Asian Pacific Islanders, I think it's up 200%. And I was looking at a chart at the
wild
thing, and it's I've had things that happen. You know, I was at
oh well, yeah, after
by the river with my mom, and this guy who's like, I don't know if he was from our neighborhood or what, because I didn't recognize him, but he like rode right by her, like so fast on his bike. Like, you know, it's like in the middle of the pandemic, no mask. He wasn't coughing or anything, but it was definitely
just
like
total
this aggressive
macro aggression
move. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? We can't walk over here. I just was like, we're just not going to walk over here anymore. So yeah, I think you're right. And I also, from a speech perspective, you know, like when I listen to Trump speak, it is scary because he has like a dominant way of speaking. It doesn't make any sense, and it's nonsense. You know, it's totally nonsensical.
But that as a culture we're still rewarding that.
Yes,
is bizarre.
This idea of this killer, right? This killer, even though he isn't that, but he was brought up that way. I was looking at a documentary in PBS, and they were putting Trump and Biden side by side. It was really interesting. But
I mean, the fragility is just so strong when he speaks, and it's wild that anybody could see him talk and feel like, oh, there's a strong leader with a self-assuredness. I just don't get that at all, you know.
But I think when people hear him, some people do get that on like a primal.
I do
weird.
too. Yeah.
It's because of his intention, that the way he was raised to be this kind of like killer, to be dominant, right? Even though everything he has done has been shit. And,
right, or the way that people think about arguing, like when you argue on the internet with someone and they're thinking they're going to try to win the argument, and there really isn't any winning an argument, especially on the internet. Especially with somebody you don't even know. It's like say your piece and let it marinate, step back. You know, the thing with people like that is they think that talking over people or drilling the same point over and over again is going to get through. And you know, the left does it all the time too, and it's not conducive. And we need to like get away from this idea of like winning the argument, and get closer to the idea of coming together over the argument, or finding common ground, or learning something, and that's it.
And to me, that is something really interesting about your work, all of your work, and what I've seen. And, you know, bringing it to some of the work that I do is that with my clients, that when I work with them, I'm always pushing that and challenging them too, to think beyond, to be beyond where they're at. And I do think that's a skill that they're very grateful to have when they work with me, you know, that I give them both like the courage and kind of like set a fire under them, but then like comforting them at the same time, like creating that safe space, right? It's interesting for me to think about,
and letting them define what that is. I mean, a lot of people will just say safe space and they don't have any definition of what safe is.
Doing the one-way communication, which I think is a dominant thing that I'm constantly, you know, I'm constantly trying to resist within the work that I do with my clients, or even like my scholarly work, and even like what we're doing now. You know, I love the idea of the back and forth and the dialogue. I think that if you lose that, like you were saying, like Twitter has become real, like these things are really happening now. If you lose that two-way conversation, it can become sort of like the loudest voice wins. and then
I think
we
I
just
think a lot
follow
of
that
people,
loud
yeah.
voice, and we think that that is strong, and we think that is correct, and we want to be a part of that because we see this as this alpha way of being, which to me is it's going out the door. At least that's what I think in the mainstream. This sort of like this older way of being a leader,
Or
being a
it might be the
communicator.
last stand, you know,
Yes.
of that kind of behavior. The last try, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But yeah, I mean, the thing with Twitter and Trump and all of that is a lot of people didn't see this coming in
Sure.
2016 or realize how much of a threat it really was because they weren't on Twitter and they didn't really understand how the internet worked. But within the last 4 years of Obama's presidency, Trump was on there every day trolling
Mm,
trolling the
yeah.
hell out of Obama. And we all saw it. People who were paying attention to that kind of thing at that time saw it. And I don't know how much we took it seriously, but the fact that he pretty much became president by trolling
Mm-hmm.
the current president,
Yes.
it says a lot about where we are and how we choose, our winners and our losers in society. And now I'm seeing this influx in energy around voting and engagement in the electoral process that I didn't see in 2016. I think a
Mm.
lot of people didn't see it in 2016. I mean, Texas has already had the highest voter turnout in history, and it's not even election day, which is
Yes.
incredible. However, you think on that, and it's kind of weird because Trump is this reality TV star, and it's almost as if people are wanting to vote now on voting him off the island or something.
The
It's like, oh, how
survivor.
do I vote? And you'll see it like there's 7 ways to vote. Here they are.
Sure.
Drop it off at a ballot. Put it in the mailbox.
I
Bring it to
actually,
City Hall. Bring it to your elections office. And so it's just interesting how it's like kind of like that culture that we have around voting on shows like American Idol is kind of like starting to transfer itself into the electoral process more, which before they didn't really think to do it that way. And there was always kind of people will vote on American Idol but not vote for president. And now I think it's kind of intermingled.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I'm curious about a couple things. One thing I'm curious about is when Trump was elected, what happened to you? I feel like something that happened to me as someone who was I'm still a scholar and like an academic and working in the university and having always worked in humanities and philosophy and theory. I after I was that night when I saw it happen, I just kind of like fell into this grief, thinking the first thing I thought of was like, first of all, like we totally messed up. And then the second thing I thought of was that, everything that I've done and all the work that a lot of my colleagues and the people in my circle are doing doesn't matter. That's what I felt. It was like this really strong call to action for me to make everything I do more accessible, because I realized that I was in a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that, liberals, leftists that whom I were friends with and were in my circle, there's a certain way of speaking and there's a certain way of discussing ideas and presenting ourselves that perhaps needs to change to try to unify people and to try to bring people back over. It was very scary to me. It was very profound. And it's still something I'm thinking about every day. I think about it all the time. It's like, how am I presenting myself? How am I talking about things so that I don't come off as elitist or I don't lose people or I'm not just like this one way? I was wondering if you could
Absolutely.
talk about that a little bit
I
with
mean,
yourself.
absolutely. I think that for me, that's a huge, that was a huge call to do the meme page and to try to engage people all over on this more friendly level.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I'd already always been kind of engaged in social justice and activism previous to Trump. And, I've lived in Oakland for about 10 years now. I've lived in the Bay Area for 15. I've been to a ton of protests in my life. I've always been part of, more progressive communities. However, I think what happened after Trump is that, I think I started to deconstruct whiteness in this way that I hadn't before, instead of kind of blaming or putting some kind of putting Trump in some kind of bubble where I'm like, oh, look at that terrible fascist up there. He makes me embarrassed to be an American. Instead of going that route with it, it was kind of like, how am I like that?
It goes
Like,
back to that I'm society, right? The Lenny Bruce phrase, I'm society,
or
you're society.
or how am I how am I connected to that culture in ways that I don't realize? Like,
yes.
How am I contributing to this culture of fascism in ways that I don't realize? How am I connected to people that may have voted for him that I didn't realize?
Sure.
And like really looking into that and thinking about that. And I think that there's always been kind of a assumption living in the Bay Area. Oh, everyone thinks the way I do, or everyone.
And that's
everyone
to me
has
like
the
the big bubble.
Yeah.
I had
and I think that people say that about the Bay a lot, but it's like it becomes increasingly obvious when you really dig deep that that's not true at all. And there is a myriad of different ways that people think about things, no matter what community you live in. It's not all a vacuum, no matter where you are.
Sure.
And especially with the internet now. And so I think it was definitely a call for me to look inward a lot too, and kind of give up this idea of being like the wokest person in the room, or being even using that word or thinking of myself that way at all, because it wasn't really helping anybody for me to get attention for being that, or anything like that. So I think that, but then in a way, it also kind of freed me to think about things like making mistakes and learning from them. And I think that a big problem with allyship, a lot of times, whether it's white allies or cis allies or straight allies or whatever, I think is that people are more embarrassed about being seen as not smart or not privy to the correct politics or language or respectability or the way you act, body language, whatever it is, than they are about the actual problem and the root cause, which is like the racism or the white supremacy or whatever it is. And I think that when you kind of detach yourself from that fear of embarrassment and that fear of humiliation, or that fear of not looking too bright or smart, it really like frees you from these constructs that keep us so in those vacuums.
I think it's interesting to think about that, because I feel like projects I've worked on, where I've tried to make things inclusive, and then there was a pushback, especially in like the more Ivy League circles that I was in, that I thought that was where I should be and belonged in. When I look back at that, it was exactly the behavior that you're talking about. And so even ranking me as
it's a hard one to break from.
Not having been a tenured professor yet, and then having been that, and then doing the fragility thing and then trying to turn it back around. It's just, it was really difficult for me when that happened to me. And it's interesting to think about that, is how much we could grow as a movement, as like a more progressive movement, and people, if we were to do that, if we were to just allow for each other to make mistakes, but also to be accountable for our own things that we don't know, because we can't know everything. We can't know all experiences, and we have our blind spots. I mean, we all do.
And we have to see the strength in that. We have to see the strength in not knowing, or the strength in being humble about things.
I think that is more like, when I think of that, I think it's like we didn't get to talk about divas at all. It's okay. We can do that maybe another time. But like when I wrote my dissertation and I've written about divas, it's the reason why I did that is because diva was made into a pejorative. And to me, when it started out,
Oh, right.
when
Yeah,
she
you're being
started
a
out,
diva right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you, it was like feminine divine, right? So it was like this God figure. But then also, if we think about it, it really is this very ultra professional person who happens to be, a more feminine person, and that's seen as a monster, like,
Well, it's
Trump calling Kamala a monster because she's well spoken and she wouldn't let Pence get away with things. So now she's a monster. It's like, no, she's actually a woman of color who like knows how to stand up for herself, and she did it.
right. And then
Several
it really
times.
makes
Now,
you, regardless of how you feel about Kamala Harris, it really makes you think about, yeah, just like how often that stereotype is, is
yeah,
used.
that if you're
Hmm.
a cisgendered, Caucasian heterosexual man or even a gay man and you speak in a certain way and assert yourself, then people listen, right? But if you're a
Right.
person of color and you do, because I know, because I've had this happen to me before so many times, being a person of color and being a woman, it's like, who are you? Like, they don't even hear you talk. It's like you
Yeah.
didn't
No.
even say anything. Or you're like this total, jerk because you have a mind and you're a really critical person. So like stay in your lane.
It's
Uh,
infantilizing. It's like the way that parents I feel like my mom does it to me sometimes. It's like a parental thing where it's like I could be saying something and it's like she doesn't hear my words coming
mhm.
out of my mouth. She hears like it's almost as if I could be 4 years old again
Yeah.
talking about some nonsense, and she's just like, that's nice, honey, it's like something, but but it's on a bigger level when it
Sure.
happens, societally like that. I think that that's what ends up happening a lot of times, is like someone's intention could be good, they could be caring about you as a friend or a lover or a coworker or whatever, and not hear a word you just said
And
because they're patronizing you.
yes. And it's interesting too, I think for me, like being a smaller woman, and even like my opera voice is actually like the lowest voice in the opera Fach. And so it's the dramatic mezzo. So it's a really big voice. Even when I sang jazz and blues, it was like this, people would always say that, like,
Hmm.
oh, this big voice came out of this little body, But then I realized when I became a scholar, I had that same voice, just with my ideas and how sharp I was to be critical, and people hated it.
Hmm.
Especially, I think, I think definitely like white scholars, like it was just like, who are you? Like you should be like lucky that you're in this room. Like that was kind of the attitude I got. But it's
Hmm.
interesting to think about the diva that way too, because the diva has a loud voice and she's
I think
very
of diva
visible and
as
she's very vocal, and then that's why there's that pejorative. It's a hatred of
it's a
the
masculine,
feminine.
it's a hate, it's also a fear of
Hmm.
masculine feminine, no,
It's
female masculinity.
yeah, female mask. I mean, and I think about the old days of like Marlene Dietrich and Greta Garbo. Like I grew up with those women, watching those women and wanting to be like them.
Right,
And
because they didn't need men. I mean,
yeah,
they stand, or they like men. They're
hmm,
sexual beings, but
even
it's
Mae
like
West.
they're fine without one.
Yeah,
You don't think of them as less because they're single or because they're
but they
not
had
married.
both. I think they had both in them. They had the masculine, the feminine, right?
I think that that's very much part of like what being a diva is for
Hmm.
sure. And it's interesting with the main character of Pink Flamingos and the actor, Divine.
Yes, I love Divine.
That's her name, is she kind
Yeah,
of does have
she is a
this,
diva.
absolutely, you know
And looking
so.
at we talked about the filth being that filthy, they're saying she is, I don't know, I guess in your
And
radio
so that's
play
kind of how
she
we look at,
wasn't.
yeah.
Oh, what you're gonna
she
say?
she wasn't, yeah, no, she wasn't, yeah, she wasn't filthy, yeah. And so it's interesting because it's like we put the name divine means God,
Yes.
it's like something we worship, but it's like, why are we worshiping something that we're so scared of? It's like there's
Hmm.
obviously something that we like aspire to.
And
when we
that's the
look.
diva. It is a thing where
Mhm.
people like love her and they're scared of her, you know, all at the same time. You could see, I mean, I see the diva in female politicians for sure too. I mean,
Yeah.
even you could talk about this is a bad diva or whatever, but you talk about a Sarah Palin's a big diva.
Yeah, for
And she's
sure.
someone that provokes a lot of fear.
Yeah, or male divas like Morrissey or Elton John, you
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're big
know,
divas.
Justin Timberlake.
Sure. Sure. So I guess we could wrap up. And we've been talking a while. Is that okay? I was
Yeah,
thinking
I would love to wrap up. I just don't know what, I just feel like I do feel like we've gone on. I just don't want to like skip over any kind of points or, um, you know.
I was thinking that just for the very end, I'd love to just hear. So I have this like mentoring part, and you don't have to go on too long. Because I know we went. I couldn't tell when we started. I think that's why.
I think we definitely gone over an hour, I
Did we go
think.
over an hour? Okay.
That's why I'm a little, yeah, but
Um,
I'm down to,
I'd love.
to conclude this.
Okay. Sorry. I hope I didn't go
No,
over
not at
your
all.
time. Maybe what we could hear from you is just like a few minutes, just thinking about like a mentoring part for people that perhaps want to do what you do and what you would suggest to them and what is your takeaway, and I'll do the same.
Okay, I don't know if I just heard like a little ding. I don't know if that
Oh,
was that our time's up on recording or something.
oh, it says it's still recording.
Okay, well then let's just continue because I wasn't sure what that was. Um, can you say one more time what what it is that
Sure.
you? Yeah.
So I usually have a mentoring component to the intersection where I just, you know, for you and what you do as this person who curates memes and being the social commentator, I feel like what would you say to someone who wants to do that work or wants to be involved? And then what is your takeaway for our podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like something I always say a lot on my meme page is when people, especially when people complain, but also when people give me praise or,
Yes.
you know, adoration, I always say that start your own. Like
Sure.
do what I do, you know, take, even if you want to use the format I've used um or play with it in your own way, which I've definitely seen some people grow out of that and do that on Instagram, and it's been really cool. But yeah, I would say just do it, you know, figure out the best way to say what it is that you want to say and that what you feel is important and needs to be out there, and then try to make it relatable. I think that that's like the number
Mm,
one key thing is how are you going to make this a universal experience in the best way you know how. Obviously you might not touch everyone in the universe, but you're going to touch a lot more people, you know, spiritually or intellectually if you're thinking in terms of how you're making this part of like the human experience.
mm-hmm.
um that would be my main advice. My other advice would be to really pay attention and look at the tools that are available to you to use. You know, we all think that I think oftentimes people will come at me on there and think that I'm some kind of business or that I have some kind of uh, additional resource that
Mm.
maybe they don't have to do this. And the truth is, I'm oftentimes doing it from my bed. You know, I mean, it's like I'm not working in an office, I'm not meeting with celebrities, I'm not getting brand endorsements or anything like that. It's all in how you present yourself and how you have confidence in what you're doing. So I think the most important thing is to really get creative about your resources and figuring out, you know, how you can make the most happen with even the littlest
Yeah,
amount of resource. Mhm.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's like very encouraging. And did you,
That's
well,
good.
so I'll tell you mine really quick, and then
Yeah.
if
No,
you
I'm
want to tell me your takeaway.
do you want me to
I,
tell me my takeaway first, or should I hear
I,
I want to hear your
okay.
mentoring part
All right.
first.
I think something that I think about with mentoring for the things that I do, and I actually might, well, I am taking on a VA, and I really want that to be a role where I'm mentoring this person too. So it's not just like, you're my admin staff. It's like, no, we're collaborating on these things together, and let's do this together. So something that I would tell people, especially for people that I think are coming out of academia and have a lot of trauma around that, is to try to pave your own way and figure out what that is. You know, just because you were trained in something and everyone around you told you now you're supposed to do that thing. It's almost like being born to a family and now you're supposed to do the family business, and you know that you hate that business.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like that in a way. Just because you have a certain training and you could do this other thing doesn't mean that you should necessarily. There are like other possibilities available for you. And the idea of having your own platforms, similar to how you have the memes and the different shows that I have too, is that when I see things that I don't like and I see media I don't like, or, you know, I'm a very critical person. So I'm so much so that people get annoyed
Mm-hmm.
at me. They're just like, shut up already. Or like,
I'm done analyzing this.
especially with a movie, or, you know, I'm the worst with movies. I'm really bad.
We should watch a movie together sometime.
We could be like those robot guys. I can't remember
Yeah.
what the Mystery Science Theater. But yeah, it's like, okay, let's take that critical energy that you have that's big, and let's make it into something resourceful and helpful and a platform. I think something that I've been it was really cute, because I shouldn't say cute, but I like that someone was writing me a recommendation for a book that I worked on with him. Sorry. A cough drop. He wanted me to read his recommendation because he said, I don't know what pronoun you use now, because he noticed that a lot of my work is focused on genderqueer,
Oh, yeah.
non-binary
Mm-hmm.
and trans people. And so he was like, and then sometimes I would say we, because I was saying queer too. And then he got
Oh,
confused. He's like,
uh-huh.
oh, are you, like, maybe I could be, I don't know. But right now I say
Were
she,
were
her.
they an English speaker first language?
No. Yeah,
Oh,
it
see,
was,
that's
but
about, yeah, that could be
yeah,
part of
that
it
might,
too.
but he was like very, you know, he knew about it, and he was just and he's a professor, so he knows with students that
I
these
like that.
policies. But it was the first time anyone had ever done that with me, and I really appreciated it. And it told me that what I'm doing is working, because one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is the way you've been outspoken with the trans community, is like, as a queer person too. And I think that's something that I've been trying to do as well. So much so that people just assume I'm a part of that community immediately, you know? And so I would say that that's kind of some of the main advice I have, is that if you want to do something, find a way to do it. It's very similar to your advice. And if
Mm-hmm.
the people that you're surrounding yourself with, and your culture and your industry and your job is permitting you from doing the thing that you most want to do, then you probably shouldn't be in that job anymore. I know that people need to work and it's our survival, but it will like tap your soul. It will just drain you, and then
Or
you
make sure you
become
balance it. You know, I've worked in service industry pretty much half my life now, and it's like always been finding those escape routes.
yes.
Finding those places where I can make my own world possible is like so important just for my mental health. And I think that you know, we're living in a time where there's probably a lot of people having to do a lot of stuff they don't really want to be doing. And you know, find your joy, find a way you can have some joy in that environment, or, you know, even
I guess
outside that environment.
I was talking just about academia, but I totally hear what you're saying in terms of,
Yeah, I mean, no, I get what you're saying about academia too, though, because it's like a societal problem where it's like kind of how we're taught to think of authority, and how we're taught to like wait for somebody to tell us what the
yes.
rules are before going forward. And what they don't tell you is that people with mass amounts of privilege and that are able to kind of move however they want through the world, just do whatever they want, and they don't wait for anybody to tell them what to do. And so you kind of have to take that on to the best of your ability to do that. I mean, it's not easy for everybody to do, but I just think it's like, you know, you got to make your own rules. Like there
Definitely.
really aren't that many rules, you know what I mean? It's more about finding your own way. And I think it's just interesting right now with COVID and the CDC and everything. You know, I'm definitely very much believe in the virus and think that, you know, people should take all the precautions they can. However, I think there's this kind of idea around, what is the CDC going to tell us to do? And it's like, the CDC is never going to tell you that you can go have a grinder hookup.
Yes.
You know, they're not going to tell you when it's safe to like have 4 friends over for a sleepover. You've got to be able to look inside yourself, assess all the risks that come with that, and make your own decisions around that, because you cannot wait for somebody else to tell you what you can and can't do. And I think that that's a really important aspect of our culture that needs to shift. And I think that politically that's where we need to go, is just more
I
of
think you're
a,
right. I
yeah.
think this idea of, and kind of what you talked about, the infantilizing, like
Infantilizing, yeah.
infantilizing, you know, I think there's something that can happen in a lot of different industries where you think like, these are the rules, and your like body is like tense to those rules, and the idea of going outside of them or figuring out what the rules really are so that you can exercise your voice is something
Or how
that,
much you need to bend them to get what you need, you know? I mean, if you really look at most people that you probably admire in whatever industry that you're in, you're going to look at their origin story, you're going to see the ways that they broke the rules, or the ways that they skirted the rules to get where they are. So there's
yes.
always that aspect of it. It's
No, I
important.
agree. No, it's really good.
And
So,
you want to do like a little takeaway?
yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay, I would say my biggest takeaway from this is how serious people should take social media as kind of a way to build community, as a way to stay informed on what's going on, as a way to get to know how we interact with each other as a culture, and then also how we're going to change that or shift that if we are. I would say that that's my biggest takeaway from this, is kind of, you know, I feel like I've learned a lot about maybe where other people are at who aren't memers like you, and understanding, you know, a little bit more of the history and context of censorship, and how important it is to really have these voices out there that are relaying messages that are oftentimes lost.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think something I learned about today was just, I guess, also the impact of social media, especially when you're talking about the algorithms and the strategy imposed upon different medias like memes in order to get certain political results is really fascinating to me. Also just thinking about, I feel like you, and maybe you don't like this word, I don't know, I haven't said this word to you, but I feel like you're this really positive person. I'm not trying to just like flatter you. That's what I'm thinking. But I feel like you're like this very positive person in terms of, you know, like turning something around. If they're, I don't know. I think about, okay, my thoughts are a little fragmented right now, but I was thinking about like when I work with a client and they're talking and there's like a dead end, right? And it's, for me, it's the job to like problem solve and like get my little construction crew out of tools and like either bust through it or find a different route or something. And that's very much how I see our conversation. Is I feel like you're someone who is not just like strategic in the kind of like work you do, but it's also like something you enjoy. It's something that you kind of like you have a vision for it that is really strong in in your politics and like kind of your sense of what you know is right for you at least, but then also open to hearing what other people think and what is right for them. To me, that is how you create community, and something I'm going to think a lot about, especially sometimes I get like stuck in a mindset where I'm like, no, it's this and then it's this, right? Especially like when I talk about academia and things like that. And I know people like are making it work. I have my own hurt around academia, you know, just because of the way
But being able to have two
received.
ideas exist
Oh, yeah.
simultaneously, like you being able to like flex and say, I've done this, and this work in academia, and that's incredible because I'm you know, a queer woman of color that's like, you know, made these strides in my field. But then also to be able to say, hey, academia is kind of bullshit in this way or this way.
Yeah.
And like feel confident in talking about that. I think, you know, it's like these things don't like you're saying, it doesn't have to be so, you know,
Well, it's like
isolated from each
people
other.
wrote these, and I feel like, who knows? I don't know what I'm going to do with this degree. Some people say you have to like respect your degree and do the thing that everyone is doing. And then other people would like write these like farewell dear John letters to academia. I don't know if you've read any of those. They're very dramatic.
No, but I can imagine.
They're super dramatic. I'm like, what if you want to go back?
I've heard those thoughts.
You know, like, what if you want to go back? So I don't want to sound like that, but when I air my grievances. But I do think it's interesting to think about critical thinking in terms of problem solving, in terms of political, social action, and ways that we can do that in practical ways. I think that's one of the main things I learned from this conversation. To me, it's just very important, especially for now. And we're entering this, whatever this new age is going to be with whomever ends up in, you know, the presidency. We don't know. So I'm crossing my fingers, but we just don't know. I mean, that's
we don't know, and I think it's okay that we don't know. I think we need to learn to be comfortable in the not knowing. And talking about making your own rules earlier, I think we need to have more confidence in ourselves that we're going to be able to pull through it.
We're going to be okay.
We have ancestors that have been through incredibly crazy things that are so much worse than this.
Yes.
And we have so much to learn from them. And you know, I feel like I pull on that a lot, you know, to get through things, and it's helped. So
it makes me think of that Schitt's Creek show, which I don't know if you've watched.
I've seen it, a little bit.
It's like a rich family who ends up in a small town, and then David, like, his biggest grievance was he's like, I haven't had kale in 2 weeks. I haven't seen kale. I know, it makes me think of that, what you're talking about. So
it's, yeah, I mean, you know,
seeing perspective, having perspective historically is really important for right now.
Absolutely. It's all about perspective for sure. And there's always somebody with a lot of strength that maybe you didn't even know had that strength in your vicinity, even, that can help guide you. So it's always good to reach out and tell people what you're scared of, because they might be scared of the same exact things.
Yeah. So I'm going to close with the same way we ended, if that's okay. And I'm just going to give my name and title, and then we'll just say the title of the podcast. So this was, and is there any, I know you're like doing these courses, but do you want to share your information, like for people to contact you for any service or anything?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, you can find me on Instagram, obviously, at CatPowerman5000, and you can check out the radio play that I just did at flamingosforever.com.
And I'll put that on there.
Flamingosforever.com, and then I mean, you can check out my work on Vimeo, Gentry McShane. It's where my short films are, and you know, looking forward to seeing more people pop up on my meme page, and seeing maybe the community grow even bigger. So, you know, glad to have everybody who joins.
And if you want to contact me for communication coaching, consulting, or cultural digital storytelling, I actually am rolling out a new program called Speak Your Way to Success, and it has a bunch of different aspects. So like intercultural, interpersonal and interpersonal communication, and public speaking, and also brand storytelling. So I have all types of, and then book writing coaching as well. I offer all
Very
kinds of
cool.
services. And then I've
I'm
actually,
going to be
that's,
hitting you up
oh,
probably.
good. This is something that I did actually, that when we were talking about, I guess we were talking about, I can't remember what we were talking about. We were talking about mentoring, but there was something that we talked about before. And one of the big changes I made after the election, I guess, was creating this business 4 years ago and then orienting it toward diverse people specifically.
Wow, that's so cool.
And
I'm
that's,
so glad we connected online,
yeah, it's so
It's been
interesting how that
cool.
just happened. And you can contact me on my website. It's wonglernercoaching.com. And so this has been, this is our closer, so it's happening. This is Dr. Shannon Wong Lerner, communication coach and consultant. And
I'm Gentry McShane, meme dealer, filmmaker, and all around wild internet personality, I guess.
And then you've been listening to the Intersection Diverse Folks Converse. This has been episode 3, The Politics of Filth, Memes, Britney. We never talked about Britney. Memes, Britney,
free
Divine.
Britney.
Yeah. Memes, Britney, Divine, and Election 2020. So thank you so much for having us.